Hello and welcome to another episode of Empire Sports Talk. I am your host, Roman Gennaro, and I'm rocking the Braves gear today because as we record this, baseball season started this past Thursday, and so we are back. It's my favorite time of the year. If you don't know this already by listening to the show, I am a self-proclaimed baseball obsessive, and so this is my favorite time of year. Baseball season is back. We've already seen several web gems. Early in the season is not shy on the great plays. The other night, Hunter Renfroe in the outfield in the opener for the Angels made an over-the-shoulder, almost no-look catch in the outfield that amazed even Shohei Ohtani. And if you can amaze Shohei Ohtani, you're doing all right. So baseball is back. As we record this on Saturday, the Final Four begins tonight with San Diego State taking on FAU, followed by UConn taking on Miami for the right to see who plays in the championship game on Monday. Still no news on Aaron Rodgers. It seems more and more likely that that deal is going to fall apart between him and the Jets and the Packers because the Packers are in no rush to give the Jets what they're looking for, and so the deal has not been closed. Yet, Odell Beckham Jr. has been seen speaking with Jets head coach Robert Saleh in recent days, so will potentially adding Odell Beckham Jr. create a sense of urgency for New York to get the Rodgers deal done? We'll find out. Not too much is going on else other than baseball starting in the Final Four, so I want to get you immediately out to our interview with former Cubs prospect and minor league baseball player Donnie Dewees, who is currently rehabbing an injury and hoping to get back in the game. But he took the time to sit down with us last week to discuss his baseball journey and the new rules that affect baseball this year at the major league level. He's been playing with them for a few years at the minor league level, and he had some very interesting takes for us on the current rules and one rule that he would like to see implemented soon. So let's get you out to that interview right now. Here it is. All right, this is Empire Sports Talk. I am your host, Roman Gennaro, and I am honored to be joined by Donnie Dewees, Major League Baseball prospect. How you doing, Donnie?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
So, you and I go back a little bit, all the way to the University of North Florida, when you were lucky enough to play there, and I was lucky enough to be a student there who was at every single game. You couldn't get rid of me. So, what I want to start with, for those that don't know, you were one of the best, I'll say, athletes that UNF has ever seen. And for those that are hearing this or hearing about you for the first time, I want to run down some of the things that you accomplished while you were at North Florida Osprey. So some you might know, some you might not. So you hold a bunch of records. It was almost staggering when I went back and looked at it. You hold the record for most hits in a season, most runs scored in a season, second most triples in a season, third most home runs in a season. You have the second highest batting average in a season, second to only Drew Weeks.
Yep.
Which I'm sure you knew because you and
He'll hold that one over me forever.
teammates, yeah. And you came up just 8 points shy of that, by the way. His record, I believe, was 430, and yours was 422.
Yeah.
5 hits in a game, which is tied for the most. You had 3 triples in a game, which is the most. 7 RBIs in a game, which is tied for second, which I found unbelievable because in 2015, Keith Skinner had 9 in a game.
I remember that game. Yep.
Yeah. And I don't know if you knew this, so you can hold this one over Drew Weeks a little bit. You have the highest career batting average in North Florida history at 382. So he might have the season mark, but you have the career.
Yeah, I've got the long haul on him.
And you have the highest slugging percentage, and I believe the highest on base percentage for both a season and career. So, but that's not all. Your 2015 season was one of the best by, I'll say, any athlete at North Florida. When I looked at these numbers, and I was there, when I looked at these numbers, I couldn't believe it. You played 60 out of 60 games, which is worth noting because when does that ever happen in sports anymore? You hit 422, which, as we said, is second all time. You had 106 hits, which is a record. You scored 88 runs, which is a record. You had 12 doubles, 8 triples, 18 home runs, 68 RBIs, 188 total bases, which is a record, 30 walks, only 16 strikeouts, and an impressive 23 of 26 in stolen bases. What do you remember about that 2015 season?
Honestly, man, it was just such a great group of guys, great coaching staff, such a good environment, and everything aligned. And the funny thing about all that is, I think 12 games in, I was hitting like 200 or 212 or something like that. I was just like, oh man, this is not going well. Coming off of playing up in the Cape and doing pretty well up there, so starting to get some like eyes on me for like real eyes on me for the draft for the first time. And so I get back from there, and 12 games in, I'm like, man, something's got to give. I got to turn this around. And then at that moment, I remember it was a bus ride home. I'm not sure from where, but it just kind of, I flipped the switch. I figured it out. And then the rest of the season was just kind of like a blur. Every game felt great. We were winning, just positive energy coming from the dugout at all times. We had people always just cheering and loud and getting in the other team's head. And I honestly think it was just we were out there having fun, and it wasn't just me that had a stellar season. You go 1 through 9 in our lineup. I think everybody essentially hit over 300, which is something that's spectacular in itself. And the fact that we didn't make it to the NCAA tournament was a heartbreaker, but. Yeah, I mean, that was just a fun team to be on, bunch of athletes and, guys that knew how to play baseball and have fun at the same time. So, credit goes out to Smoke Laval. He coached us very well. He was pretty laid back, but he was hard on us to get the things that we needed to get done. And it's just that's really what I give my credit to. And, I was hard at work, and I put in the work that I needed to do, trained hard in the weight room, trained hard with out on the field, and it paid off. So just the whole scenario was great.
The 2015 season was a special one, not just on the field, but for me as well as a viewer and a supporter. But when I was looking up, the records to compile your for this interview, I noticed that your teammates Trent Higginbotham and Ryan Roberson were also on the RBI list for most in a season, and it was 2015. So I'm guessing that had a little something to do with your breaking the single season runs record, because you were likely on base for them for all that.
Yeah, I mean, having them behind me, absolutely. I think I hit in the 2 hole most of that year. We had Kyle leading off, and then Trent and Robo behind me. I get on first base. It's like probably going to score if I maybe steal second, and then they're probably going to get a hit or hit a homer or something like that. I mean, it was just ridiculous the output that they had in the 3-4 hole, and I could rely on them every time I got on to find a way to get me in.
I was speaking to Joe Wilbruda the other day about playing with guys like Robo, and I told him that what I remember of his UNF career was that he never seemed to get out. He always seemed to get on base whatever the team needed him to do. He was on base, and he talked about playing with Robo that he felt like Ryan Roberson never got out. He said, you say that you feel like I never got out. Ryan Roberson, legit, when he went up there, I felt like he was never going to sit back down.
Yeah, and I mean, Joe was the master at hitting it where they were not. He would find the hole in the field and hit it there. He didn't hit a lot of homers. I don't know if he had any homers or not, but
he had a few, but he knew that wasn't his strength.
Yeah, but he was the master at hitting that line drive up the middle or a little bit backside, just where people weren't, and getting on base and letting the big guys do the rest. And then Robo, yeah, it seemed like every time he got up, and Robo, he's already got a big head, so I don't want to blow it up anymore. But he was smash baseballs. I mean, pretty much every time.
He was really, really talented. There was one season, I can't remember if it was 2014 or 2015, but the season kicks off and just right away, Robo cannot miss. It was almost like the Terminator out there. Like he always, brought his bat with him when he came to the field. But one of these years, I can't remember if it was 2014 or 2015, he literally could not miss.
I think it was 15. Yeah.
And it went for like 2 straight weeks where I think he didn't make it out. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this man is a machine.
Yeah. You talk about Robo, and probably one of the most confident people I know. You could throw Aroldis Chapman out on the mound, and Robo would still go up there with the mentality that he's going to hit a homer. And I think that's where he got a lot of his success from, is just having that mentality of always thinking he's gonna have a positive outcome one way or another. And this is funny. I remember competing against him and just like a mess around home run derby, and I went first. We did best of 5. I hit 4 out of 5 out of the park. I'm like, he's got no chance. Guy goes up and hits 5 out of 5, and I'm just, you tip your cap to him, and it is what it is. The guy just was so confident in himself, and I think that's what carried him through, is having that ability to trust in himself.
Speaking of competitions, I was talking to, I believe it was Joe also, because I've done 2 interviews this week, and your name came up in both of them organically as to like how good of an athlete that you were. Like I told Joe that I thought he was one of the best hitters I'd ever seen, and he brought up your name. And obviously he's working for the Yankees in the amateur scouting and video department. And he said, we're looking for the next Donnie Dewees. And then I talked to Bo Beach, the basketball player, and he brought up your name. Sometimes you don't know if other student athletes are paying attention to fellow student athletes, but he brought up your name and how ridiculous of an athlete you were. So your name's come up twice.
Yeah, well, I mean, props to them too. They're both quite the athletes as well, and I believe Bo's still playing, correct?
Bo is, yes. He's in Serbia right now. He's in Belgrade, Serbia. Speaking of contest, you were talking about the home run contest with Robo. I believe this was also 2015 or 2014, that it seemed like you and Corbin Olmsted were going tit for tat the entire season. If you hit a double, he hits a triple. If you hit a home run, he hits a home run right after you. And it was just like for the entire season, it seemed like it was that what was that Kevin Garnett and Mia Hamm commercial back for Gatorade years ago, where it was anything you could do better. It felt like you two doing that the whole season.
Well, we were roommates, so there was already that in-house kind of rivalry and competition, and we were always back and forth, kind of like brothers would be, and just all over each other all the time. And so I think that was part of it. Like, we would just trash talk back and forth to each other. I remember before the season, I think we were in the cage talking about it. And, like I told him I'm going to hit 20, and he's like, well, I'm going to hit 21 or 22 or something like that. I'm like, all right, we'll see, man. And just back and forth all year. I'm not sure. What did he end up with? I think it was like 15.
I think it was somewhere around there, because he was not above you on the list of home runs in a season, and you had 18 that year. So I believe he had 15 or 16. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, he just he was a solid athlete, had the coordination, and the incredible thing about him too is he was our lights out closer. You put him around in the 9th inning and it's game over.
And I was just going to bring that up because it always surprised me, and I used to talk about this with Evan and Sinelli, where we were surprised that he didn't really get a chance at the next level, because not only was he a really good hitter, but and I stand by this, he may not have thrown 100 miles an hour, but he was one of the hardest throwers I've ever seen. Like his fastball may have come out of his hand at 89, 90, but it looked from the stands like it was going 147 miles an hour. And it's like, how can anyone hit that?
Yeah, I mean, 2015, the numbers he put up at the plate and the numbers he put up on the mound, you put that somewhere in the top 10 rounds, to be honest, from my opinion. I mean, the only thing working against him, I think, was just the athleticism side of things. But he doesn't look like he's super athletic, but the kid's super athletic. And I think that worked against him in a lot of ways, which is really bad. Just like that the overall outlook of professional sports as they look at stuff like that. But the kid worked hard. The kid had the talent. He was strong. He was fast. And I mean, he's not going to be stealing 10 to 30 bags a year, but the kid, he moved a little bit for a bigger guy. He was 240, 250 pounds and squatted 600 pounds and hit balls 450 feet, throws 90 to 94 off the mound with a lights out slider, a below 1 ERA. Shocked me that he didn't get an opportunity. And, I think he absolutely deserved it.
Something I always pay attention to, like you mentioned, he wasn't like the fastest guy out there, but there is a, and sometimes I see people not pay attention to this as much, but there is a distinct difference between slow and a bad base runner. For instance, like I know Freddie Freeman is not the fastest guy, but he's a really, really good base runner because there's speed and then there's intelligence to know the situation. And I feel like Corbin was a really good base runner. He may not have been the fastest guy, but that's not everything.
And for how big he was, you know, he wasn't slow. He could move a little bit. And I'm not going to take that. It was just, but given the statistics he had, it's hard to not give that guy a chance. You know, if I'm a scout, I'm going to put him on the radar. This guy's going to hit 15 homers, I don't know what his average was, 350, 343, somewhere in there. And
it was good. It was good.
Lights out, you know, almost 2Ks per inning with a below 1 ERA as the closer for a team that goes 45 and 16. I'm going to give that guy a chance, you know, whether I take him in the 20th round or whatever, but that deserves a chance.
That was 2015 before before we got a chance to see a player like Shohei Ohtani. Do you think that if Corbin did that now, if he was doing that in college this year, would it be a different story now that we've seen players like Shohei Ohtani doing both at a high level? Do you think?
I don't see why not. I mean, Shohei is obviously a freak athlete, you know, throw 102 off the mound with hit 30 to 40 homers a year. I mean, just that's ridiculous. But either way, you take somebody, whether you don't believe in a two-way player, like you take them and you test out both sides of it, see which one works out more for you. You know, you have the opportunity. You can pitch in short season or rookie ball or whatever and hit at the same time. Like, it's not the end of the world. The guy's been doing it his entire life. It's not that.
Like new. Who was it? DeGrom was a shortstop in college, and he turned into one of the best pitchers the game has. You know.
Yeah, you just never know. I mean, but when you put up numbers like that and you do everything you're supposed to, it's hard to swallow the pill that you don't get another chance at the next level because you did everything you were supposed to. You worked hard, you trained hard, and then just to be rejected the opportunity is kind of depressing, I would imagine, for him. I absolutely think he deserved it.
So back to you. As we mentioned, your 2015 season was definitely the stuff of legend in Jacksonville. But I looked at the stats and I thought you were named a 2015 Golden Spikes Award finalist that year. And for those that may not know, the Golden Spikes Award is basically the Heisman Trophy of college baseball. And I'm thinking to myself, I know he's at a small school, but how did he not win? And then I went and I looked at the other finalists that you were against, and it's a who's who of MLB All-Stars. I'm going to read this list real quick. Andrew Benintendi, Alex Bregman, Dansby Swanson, Scott Kingery, Ian Happ, Carson Fulmer, Phil Bickford, DJ Stewart, and Donnie Dewees. And that's just a few. That's not even all of them. So what has it meant to you at that time? Obviously, Andrew and Benintendi ended up winning the award in 2015. But what, if anything, did it mean to you at that time to be a finalist with guys that are making their mark at the major league level now?
You know, just being around those guys, and I was around a lot of those guys in the Cape the summer prior to getting drafted, and seeing that talent level and, you know, realizing that they're not any different than I am. You know, me keeping up with them and competing with them at the top tier summer league showed me, it really opened my eyes to, like, you know, I have just as much potential as any of these guys. And, you know, I never have been one to read into like awards and stuff like that. I've always kept my head down and just kind of been driven to do what I got to do to get to the next level. Yeah, find my way.
It shows on the field for sure.
Yeah. So I honestly, like, being there and being part of that achievement was an awesome feeling, but I didn't even realize, like, I didn't think too much into it. It's just like something I look at and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. You know, I did pretty well, but then move forward from there and keep my nose down and keep going to the next level and keep going and going. But
that's a good outlook. You said that you saw these guys like the season before in the Cape Cod League. Was that like a moment for you? Because it sounds like it was a moment for you where you were like, oh yeah, I'm as good as these guys. Was that the moment that you realized you had a legitimate shot at the next level?
Oh yeah, yeah. So everybody in that league, I felt like I was just as good as, if not better, with the exception of possibly Ian Happ. I looked at him when I played with him in the Cape, and this kid was just hitting both sides of the plate. Perfect baseball build, 6'1", something like that, just 210 pounds, smashing baseballs every at bat, and certainly gave me my exercise in the outfield when I played against him. So, I looked at him and I'm like, this guy's got it all. He hits from both sides of the plate for power, contact. He's fast. He can play infield. He can play outfield. He's got a right-handed glove. So that was one guy I looked at and I'm like, he's going to be a top 10 pick. And what do you know? I think he went 9 overall.
It's
Um,
it's interesting you bring him up because weren't you guys teammates at one point? How,
very briefly,
however
yeah, very,
briefly,
very
yeah.
briefly. Yeah, and Eugene, he got called up
Yeah,
fairly quickly.
in the Cubs organization, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, and you're not the only recent UNF baseball player to be mentioned in the Golden Spikes Award finalist conversation because Drew Weeks the year before was in that, and he had an amazing season that he holds the record for hitting 430 in a season. I believe that was that year. So
Mm-hmm.
so UNF may not be known to a lot of people out there as far as baseball, but they're starting to churn out some talent. I know Frank German is with the White Sox now, so they're and then Brian Baker is obviously in the majors as well. So UNF is becoming kind of a lesser known factory
Yeah.
for talent at the next level.
Is Frank with the White Sox or the
Frank
Red
is with
Sox?
the White Sox. Yes, he
Okay.
spent last season, I believe. He was drafted by the Yankees. He broke in with the Red Sox.
Yeah, he was
He
like the first trade between the Yankees and Red Sox in a long time or ever,
yeah.
I think. Yeah.
He broke into the league with the Red Sox and then I believe he became a free agent like in the offseason and is now in camp with the White Sox. So we'll see if he breaks camp. So we've talked around your college career at this point, but like what is like your favorite memory of playing college ball?
Probably winning the conference championship or the season conference. We had a huge celebration. I believe it was at Kennesaw. I'm not 100% sure where it was, but that was such an awesome experience. We all dogpiled on the pitcher's mound and uh, big celebration in the locker room. That was a really cool experience. And honestly, it's just about the group of guys that we did it with. And just, we formed like a little family there and we were all super tight knit. And that's something special. I don't know what the environment's like at UNF right now, but, back in 2012 to 2015, that was such a tight knit group of guys. And that freshman class that we had come in 2012 was, we all just hung out all the time. And that was something special. But that memory of us winning it in 2015 was big. That was a lot of fun.
I feel like it's something that can't be overstated because you hear a lot of managers and a lot of players say, "Oh, we have a special group of guys that care a lot about each other." And I know this is not always the case, but what difference do you feel it makes when there's truly that chemistry and that bond with an entire team?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely makes the world a difference. These guys have each other's back all the time, not just on the field, but off the field. And, we're hanging out and we enjoy each other's company. And, we're calling and texting each other, whatever, going and doing things, exploring the campus, going down trails. And that's something that correlates to the field. You have like a brotherly love. So you bring that from off of the field to the field. And then, when you're competing with each other, you just have each other's backs throughout the whole thing. And that absolutely goes a long way. It's not an individual sport at that point. It's a team sport. And, baseball is a team sport. You need everybody on the field to do their part, and everybody wanted to.
I saw a quote one time recently, and it said, "Surround yourself with the kind of people who will be right behind you if you ever charge the mound." And
Oh yeah,
it sounds like this was that group of guys.
yeah. You better believe. And honestly, we probably instigated that several times from the dugout. And we got a bunch of people that are chirping the entire time. We got Nick Miller, Jaime, we got Robo, we got Bubba. Everybody's chirping from the dugout nonstop, whether they're in the game or not. And yeah, absolutely. I think if there was ever an issue, everybody would have been there.
I don't know if you were there at the time. You had to have been there, I think. And Evan Antonelli used to tell me that he couldn't really hear what was happening in the stands when he was on the field. I don't know if that was the case for everybody, but there was one incident against Mercer, and I want to say you were already there. So let me know if you remember this. Mercer comes from Macon, Georgia to us, and Friday night, for whatever reason, their fans came fired up. Not at you guys, but at us. We're sitting over on the first base side, and they're over on the third base side, and they're chirping. And I believe they won the Friday night, which was not great for them because they just fed into it more, and they were telling us, go home, go to bed, and we're like, we are home, like this is Jacksonville, you guys came to us, and it spilled over into Saturday, and we're chirping back at them, they're chirping back at us, and then we win on Saturday, and then we walk off on Sunday. It was like a tight game the whole way, and we walk off on Sunday, and the whole weekend I was telling Joe about this because I swore he got the walk-off hit, but I couldn't remember. But we walk off on Sunday because I thought there was going to be a brawl in the stands between us and Mercer's fans, because for whatever reason they came to fight on Friday night. They came to fight us, and I don't know why. And it felt like it was close to happening. And so for us to walk off to win the series on Sunday, they do a 180 and they turn hard and they are leaving, and we're waving goodbye. We're like, see ya,
Yeah.
And soon after they left the conference.
Yeah, I mean that almost fuels us, especially that group of guys we had. We hear our fans standing up for us and their fans chirping back and forth. And I don't know if their team was built the same way at Mercer, but I'm sure they were. I think they had a pretty competitive team that year. But we were fueled by that, I'm sure. And we went out and left everything on the field. But when we hear our fans cheering, chirping back and forth, and yelling at each other, it's like motivation for us too. It's an outside factor, but we hear that too, and we want to, obviously our fan base is important to us, so we want to do everything we can to back up our fan base too, not just back up the team, but back up everybody involved.
Because I'm trying to remember exactly when it happened. Does that ring a bell for you, walking off on Mercer at home on Sunday?
Yeah, I do remember something of that nature, and I'm pretty sure you're right. It was Joe. I remember that celebration now.
Because he had, I don't think he had a memory of that, which is shocking to me, because I was asking him what his favorite memory was, and he said, oh, it was walking off of on so-and-so senior year. I believe it was my only walk-off hit that year. And I was like, I don't think it was.
I feel like he walked off a couple times. But yeah. I do remember him walking off. I think it was a base hit up the middle, and we all met it somewhere between first and second towards the out.
So I'm sure you on the field were not aware of what was happening in the stands, but it was about to come to blows at the moment that Joe walked it off, which was like the ultimate eruption of, we got you, go home. It was one of those things.
Yeah.
That was one of my most vivid memories. And then a few years later, I'm sitting, because you remember, I used to get there like an hour before. I used to like sit and watch y'all like bring out take the tarp off and do the whole thing. And I'm sitting there, and I didn't believe in sunscreen at the time. So I was pretty red from the day before, on my legs and on my arms and on my face. And Richard Miller, the voice of the Ospreys, happens to walk by as he's going up to the booth, and he says, hey, you're here every week, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, I am. And he goes, do you want to come and do the pregame show up in the booth? And I said, absolutely. And I think this was a few days after Smoke had won his 600th career game. I think this was like the week of, and he asked me, he said, what's your favorite memory of all the games that you've seen? And I brought up that Mercer weekend of them trying to give us crap, even though they were visiting us. And so that was definitely memorable to me. So it's good to know that you remember that.
Yeah.
So you from from UNF and from your whole baseball career, you've done a lot of traveling, but then you've spent a lot of time in minor league baseball where there's a lot of smaller towns and a lot of kind of it's a more rural environment, so to speak, than college and definitely than pros, I would say. So what's your best travel story from all the places?
Oh man.
For baseball?
Yeah, so I've been a lot of places all over the country, and some of them are bigger. Once you get up to like double A, it becomes more like bigger cities, not obviously not like LA and like Miami and stuff like that, but they're pretty big. We go to Nashville and Reno. We go to Salt Lake City, a bunch of big cities, and we're based out of Des Moines with the Cubs there. But honestly, my favorite memory of travel, I went in high school with USSSA. It was all included, paid for. We had like several tryouts for the national team, and I got to go to the Czech Republic twice, and that was such a fun experience, being 17, 18 and just going over there and playing. It was a bunch of grinders, everybody's trying to get their scholarships or get drafted out of high school. And one of the big names you might know is Wyatt Matheson. He was on that team.
Wow.
Yeah, there was quite a few of them over there that were really talented baseball players. And just that experience to have and experience a different culture was a lot of fun for me. And
awesome.
for professionally, oh man, honestly, it's hard to say professionally because it's so busy. You're playing 7 days a week, traveling every 3 or 4 days on an airplane or on a bus, whatever it may be, and everything just kind of blends together. You're just showing up. You don't really. Some people go out and experience the town and go out and have a couple drinks, but for me personally, like I was playing every day, and it's hard to play 7 days a week, and with practice and games, you're out there honestly 6-7 hours. Whether you're in the cage, you're out on the field for BP, infield, whatever it may be, playing the game, you're exhausted by the time you get home. And so for me, going out after, my legs were always jello. I never really partook in that. So I think I went out one time in Nashville. I went out in Reno to the casino, played some, gambled a little bit, and did that. But yeah, it's just such a grind. It's hard to pinpoint one experience in professional baseball of travel.
So I don't know if you're much of a food guy, but you've been in a lot of these environments, so you've been around a lot. What's the best like food concoction you've come across?
To be honest, we get fed okay, but we get the best meals when a big leaguer rehabs with us. So with the Cubs, they do a pretty good job on the
I've heard
nutrition
that.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll get like Ruth's Chris, we'll get steaks, chicken. We'll get Outback every once in a while. So I mean, we've had some really good meals. It's hard to pinpoint just one. Every time a big leaguer rolls through AAA and does a rehab, they buy us the spread, and that's kind of like I think it's an unwritten rule. But you rehab with a team, you buy the spread if you're a big leaguer.
Yeah, I'm sure that's an exciting thing. Like if you're like a double A or triple A player, and you're grinding down there, and then say Bryce Harper shows up for a couple of games, or Ronald Acuna, I know, was here in Jacksonville for a 4-game stretch with Gwinnett, and a bunch of people went out to see him. So I'm sure even for fellow players, it's pretty exciting to see a big leaguer make a couple of rehab starts right next to you.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you kind of just keep your distance, take a little note. But it's almost just like we're on the same team, we're part of the same family, and we all see each other in spring training, especially as you get older and you get towards the upper levels. Some of your friends make it to the big leagues. I got several guys that I played through the minor leagues with that are on the big leagues now, and it's you look at them more as like friends. It'd be different. I haven't really had an experience where I've had somebody like Mike Trout or obviously Mike Trout's not on the Cubs, but like somebody with a big name like that roll through and rehab with me. But it's definitely cool. I mean, a lot of the guys that are up there now, I know a lot of the guys that are in the big leagues now. So consider us more friends than somebody to admire, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to explain that one. Like,
No,
it's cool,
I get that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever been starstruck before
By a player?
by anyone?
Um, hmm. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any.
I'll tell you, the only time I can think of it really happening to me was when I ran into John Smoltz at the Tim Tebow Golf Classic here in Jacksonville. Because he was such a big part of like the reason I love baseball and like my childhood that
Mhm.
like I was standing in a crowd of people, and by the end of the day, because like you're standing, you basically pick a hole, and you camp out to see the people come by. And so by the end of the day, the people around me knew that like I knew John Smoltz was there, and I was super excited. So by the time he gets there, they like push me to the front, and I get up there, and I almost don't know what to say. So for me, I think meeting John Smoltz was that moment. But I didn't know if you have ever experienced kind of that, whoa, like there's so and so right there. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's really a cool experience to be on the field with some of these guys. Like I've played with Mike Trout. I've been on the same field with a lot of these guys. I've backed up a lot of the big league games in spring training. So I've been around a lot of big names. Um, I think from my perspective, I see it a little differently just because I'm competing to get to and I'm competing to get to the same spot that they're at, and I
right.
don't see myself as less than them. So I see them as not necessarily like competition, but kind of competition. So I feel like I can get to where they're at. So I don't necessarily look at them as like superheroes. There's some
No,
guys
for sure.
obviously that are a little different than
Yeah,
outside of the norm. Like if I did admire Mike Trout. He's one of my favorite players to watch. Just he's very humble. He's driven. He's quiet but very successful. And then obviously like looking at Shohei Ohtani and playing against him, that's pretty cool. To have one of the you play with two of the league MVPs. Obviously, they're probably the best baseball players in the world, and you're
for sure.
standing on the same field competing against
I
them.
would say so. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're just on the same field competing against them. So it's like that's pretty cool. I mean, those are cool experiences that I'll remember forever for sure. But while I'm doing it, it's just like I'm so hyper focused on playing and getting in the game and doing my part to help the team. It's like I can't be distracted by the fact that there's these superstars out there.
For sure.
That I think that's a bigger reason as to why I'm not super starstruck by it.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you said about kind of that year in the Cape Cod League where you kind of looked around, and that was a moment for you where it was like, oh, I am a peer. I am one of these guys. Maybe you've taken that mentality all the way through, it sounds like. Um so as a player, and more specifically as a hitter, um obviously all of sports, all of professional sports are going through sweeping rule changes right now. Um, what are your thoughts on some of the rule changes that baseball has seen in the last couple of years between universal DH, the extra inning base runner rule, the bigger bases, the pitch clock? What are your thoughts on some of these?
I'm all for it. I think the universal DH is great. I don't think pitchers should be putting their body at risk as a hitter. Personally, they are drafted as a pitcher. They are competing as a pitcher. Essentially, you send them to the plate. They're an out. They're an easy out. And I'm not saying that to be mean, but they're not being paid to hit. And, one side of the league has a DH and one side doesn't. So only half of the league is really at risk of getting injured. And some of the pitchers, I've seen people come real close to being hurt running from home to first as a pitcher. They try to bust it out, especially at the AAA level or AA where, they incorporate the pitcher hits as well. They don't have the DH and the National League side of that. So, I just, from that spot, I think it's an injury risk. The bigger bases, I think it's safer. The pitch clock needs a little modification, I think. There needs to be some leeway when a hitter swings and fouls the ball off. The pitcher gets the ball back, steps on the mound, the timer starts. He needs a little bit of time to reset. I've had that happen a couple times, but if you take a pitch, you don't need 20 seconds to just walk around and kick your bat and all that. So I think the pitch clock's good. It took about 30 minutes. I had that, and this past year, our games were flying by. It was great.
So you've had experience at the plate with the pitch clock.
Yeah. I've only had one issue with it, and that was after a foul ball, and the pitcher stepped right back on the mound, and I only had 11 seconds before I had to be in the box with both feet, both hands on the bat, ready to hit, and that was an issue. But that's where I think it needs addressed. But I don't think you need to walk all the way around home plate in between every pitch.
No, for sure. I think like you said, I think there are a couple of tweaks that I would like to see be made, and I think it's good that initially I didn't like it at all. Initially, from the outside, I'm a baseball purist. I didn't like it at all, and it's one of these things where I watched it, and I think there's a little bit of confusion from the viewer standpoint of like, you have 15 seconds, and then the pitcher gets ready, and then the batter has until 8 seconds to get in the box, and then if there's still 8 seconds on the clock but the batter's not in the box, it's a violation. I don't think they've made, at least early in spring training, made a great job of making that clear to the viewer that is what the violation is. But I think the biggest issue for me is, and this is why I'm glad they're testing it out in minor league or in spring training, and in minor league baseball for the last couple of years, is personally, early in spring training, we saw games get decided by, the first week a Braves game ended in a tie on a full count pitch, and so my personal thoughts is I would be fine with it if it was turned off in the 9th inning and or extra innings, so that it doesn't actively, because to me it's like a fifth umpire, right? It's so like you're not really supposed to know it's there, and if you do, it's a problem. So for me personally, I'd like to see it turned off in extra innings, or the 9th inning. And if a player, say, gets brushed back, or a player hits the deck because the ball, came close to them, the pitch clock should be turned off for the next pitch. Those are just my modifications that I would like to see.
There's got to be feel. That's what that's what I mean by, like, there's got to be some consideration for the situation. It can't be, the same ordeal. Like if he fouls the ball off, or, he's running down the first base line, you can't, as soon as he steps on the rubber, start the clock. There's got to be implications to where there's some leeway and some grace, like, feel from the umpires or the person running the clock up top. Like, you can't rush the hitter. Like you can, you can tell him to, like, don't mess around, like get back in the box and get ready to hit, but you can't get a guy to get back in the box, catch his breath, and get his bat ready within 11, 12 seconds to hit the next pitch. It's just, there's got to be some feel, and I think they'll figure that out. But
yeah, exactly.
I'm all for it. I'm all for it because, when it takes 20 to 30 minutes off of a game and you're playing 140 to 160 games a year, that saves a lot of time. And, at the end of the year, you're a little less fatigued. By the end of a baseball season, you're absolutely just toast. I mean,
for sure.
You go home and you don't do anything for a month. You just rest and recover, let your body rebuild itself. I think all the rule implications are good. And another one that I think would be okay, I'm an advocate for, would be automatic umpires. I know a lot of people are against that. Yeah. But I've had throughout my career, if I were to go back and look at every at bat and break it down as to like what's been called a ball or a strike on me, I've had a lot more balls called strikes on me than strikes called balls. We have some pretty advanced technology that's very impressive. So I can go back and look at the previous day's game footage, and it will tell me the percent called strike. And I remember one game, this was AAA. We had bases loaded. We were, I think it was tied, or we were down by 1 or something like this. 3-2 count. I'm batting, and I get called on a ball that's probably 4 to 5 inches off the plate. And I go look at it the next day, and it was a 0.1% called strike. And he rung me up on it, and I almost got thrown out of the game over it. And then I got ripped by our hitting coach, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do there? Now, I did everything right. I mean, other than striking out, but that's not on me. If we have automatic strike zones, like it gets called a ball, like it should be. And that the whole ordeal, like people, even within baseball, they talk about it, and then they're like, "Oh, you won't like it when a slider comes in and it hits that bottom of the zone and then bounces in front of the catcher." It's like, well, did it cross the knees? It's hittable. It's a strike.
Right.
That's my whole outlook on that. And human error doesn't have to be a part of the game, because at the end of the day, human error affects the athlete, not the umpire. It does affect the umpire, like from a standpoint, they're not going to get moved up if they have a bad strike zone or they make bad calls all the time. But as a hitter, they don't look into, what happened here. They don't have like a statistic, or at least I'm not aware of, that they go through all the game data and break down like, oh, this should have been a walk and not a strikeout, so let's adjust his average. Like, we don't get that advantage of adjusting our statistics based on the human error of the umpire.
For sure.
Whether it be safe or out at first. I know several times bang bang plays at first base when I'm busting butt down the line and it's bang bang and I'm safe and I know I'm safe, and they ring me up. They're already, before I even touch the base, they're gearing up back here to ring me up, and I'm like,
Right.
That's a big difference. 10 that happens 5 to 10 times a year. That's 10 to 15 points on your batting average.
Right. So. It's interesting that you bring up automatic umpires, and you bring up, that you almost got tossed from the game after being called out on a ball 5 inches off the plate, because as I'm sure you've seen, that game between Mississippi Valley State and whoever it was, where that umpire held a grudge. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, they're spiteful too. Yeah, some of them, not all of them. I'm not going to take away from them. There's some really good umpires out there, but there's some umpires out there that you tell them that they didn't do their job right or they made a bad call, they'll stick up for themselves and they'll hold a grudge and ring you up the next time too. So that doesn't have to be a part of the game, and I don't think it should. I mean, you're taking away jobs from these guys. They can still be there. I'm not trying to take umpires out of the game, but take away the human error. That doesn't need to be a thing. Yeah, that's my whole outlook on it.
Well, what are your thoughts specifically on that moment of that strike 2 call not being that close, and then the next one, and then because he was showed up by the batter, the next one being in the dirt and strike 3? What are your thoughts? And then that umpire got suspended after that. So what? Most people think that is an example of, like, the best example of the need for robot umpires. So what are your thoughts as an obvious proponent of the automatic strike zone, or what are your thoughts on that moment in that situation at a Division I level?
It'd be hard to incorporate that at college level just because of the technology advances and the cost. At the professional level, certainly there's money there to incorporate that. But universal, I think as you get older, the plate gets smaller, essentially. So college, they'll give you a little bit off the plate. They'll give you a little bit either way. Do I think it should be that way? No, because you're being trained to not swing at the balls that aren't over the plate, but it is. And I don't know if there's any changing that. But like holding grudges, that umpire absolutely should have received a suspension, and probably a fine on top of that too,
Yeah. I was having a conversation about it where when the strike 2 comes in, obviously the catcher did a serviceable job trying to frame it and make it look like one, but it was one of those obvious frame jobs where he brings the glove way up, and the hitter was not happy, obviously, and he draws that line in the sand. And I was talking with Joe the other day, and he said that Bryce Harper got tossed for doing just that in the minors, and he said that the umpire would have been well within his rights to toss him right there, and that would have been the end of it. And it would have been, and it wouldn't have been a national story. But the fact that he didn't, it should have ended right there, and it didn't. And then he said, he made it personal and said, I'm going to ring you up no matter what. And then the next ball's in the dirt. Only Vlad Guerrero could hit it, and he calls strike 3.
Yeah, I mean, drawing the line in the sand, that is kind of personal because it shows up the umpire. Don't do that. But yeah, he should have just tossed him, or given him a warning. holding grudges like that, though, that's not good for the game of baseball. That's not good for anybody involved. You hurt the hitter. The only person it helps is the pitcher. He gets one more strikeout under his belt. Right. But it hurts you too, because now you're on national social media across the country, and everybody sees it. So you don't want that look on you. The hitter doesn't want that look on him, like showing up the umpire. It's a lose-lose for everybody involved.
Going back to the pitch clock for just 1 second. One thing that we didn't touch on that I would like to get your opinion on. Obviously, the minor leaguers have been doing it for a few years now. As you've said, you've had experience with it. What are your thoughts on at the beginning for some major league veterans who have not experienced it, the possibility that injuries could increase as a result of everything being sped up?
I don't think there's a huge injury risk with a pitch clock. My whole thing is it's going to possibly affect statistics if you're in the box and you're out of breath and you're not ready. Really, the hitter just needs to feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. He doesn't need to waste all the time in the world, beating around the box and hitting his bat off his cleats and all that. There's routines, like that doesn't take a ton of time, but I don't think there's an injury risk. I think it's more of a statistic risk.
One of the funny stories from early in spring training was Pete Alonso, and he goes up to the plate and he's feeling hurried and he's doing the whole thing, and he strikes out pretty quickly. He strikes out 3-4 pitches, and he comes back to the dugout and he says, I can't do it. I don't think I can do it. Very next at bat, he homers, and he comes back and he goes, I'm fine. So it speaks to the fact that baseball is a game of adjustments, period. And it's like, whether it's from one at bat to the next, or whether it's from not using a pitch clock to using a pitch clock, it's a game of adjustments. And that Pete Alonso story is, in a nutshell, I guess, mm-hmm. what being in the game of baseball even is just going up to the plate, ready for what's next.
Yeah. With any new rule changes, there's always going to be backlash from some of the players or some of the athletes, and it's just like you said, a game of adjustments, and that's what it's going to be. They're new rules. You understand them. You know them. Within 3 to 4 years, this probably won't even be a topic of discussion anymore. It'll just be, an accepted new rule. And I think all the rule changes they're implementing aren't necessarily bad. There's going to be people that don't like them, of course, because they like to take their time. But, from a defensive perspective or a pitcher's perspective, anytime a hitter just kind of moves around the box and wastes your time, like you're just standing there waiting. And that's kind of how I look at it. Is if I'm in the outfield, I want things to happen, Yeah. I want them to happen quick. I don't want to wait a minute in between pitches, because you're doing whatever you do, just taking your sweet time. And, it speeds up the pitchers too, because some pitchers like to just take their sweet time and hold for 20 seconds. Like, you need to be ready to go. Like,
right.
And I'm all supportive. I'm all in on that. And that's just, it's an adjustment. You got to get used to it.
And I'm sure even as an outfielder, in terms of being engaged in the moment, I imagine it's harder for an outfielder. You're far away from the action. You're just kind of standing out there, and when the action comes to you when it comes to you. So if there's a pitcher or a hitter taking their sweet time, in my interview the other day, talked about how defenses will be more engaged because you got to be ready to go. It's one of these things, and so I imagine as an outfielder that speaks even more to you, as there's more standing around in the outfield than there is probably anywhere else on the field.
Yeah, literally, we have 20 seconds. Say, the pitch clock's 20 seconds. If the ball's not put in play, you're literally just standing around looking at whatever for 20 seconds. You're just waiting. You always need to be ready, obviously, for the pitcher to pitch the ball, but you only need to be ready when the ball's in the strike zone, when the contact's going to be made. You need to be on your toes, ready to jump, go whatever direction it's going to be. You have 20 seconds in between that to just kind of stand around. If you are in one of the corner spots and they hit a long foul ball, you need to obviously get back to your possession and regroup. And they have a little bit of feel. They did in the minor leagues for that. If a left fielder runs all the way to the left field line or the stands or something like that, they give them time to get back before they start the clock. But Yeah, I mean, the faster the game moves for an outfielder, the more involved you're going to be, the more concentrated you're going to be. You don't have all that time in between pitches to lose focus.
I mean, what was it? There was a 14-11 game that went 2 hours and 24 minutes, I think, earlier in spring. So, I mean, there you go. I saw a quote earlier today from someone on Twitter, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I already had we've already kind of danced around it, but I want to get your thoughts directly on this quote. It says, "It's wild to me that we're materially changing the way baseball is played and experienced, and the only reason anyone can come up with is because it might make people who already don't like baseball slightly more tolerant of the game length."
It's not just benefiting the players in a faster game pace, game speed. The fans don't want to go there and watch people mess around either. Like, realistically, a baseball game should take anywhere between 2.5 to 3 hours. Without the pitch clock, games take anywhere between 3 to 3.5. So you're adding 30 minutes onto the game, and the players are, I think, the biggest concern. Obviously, you want to see action faster. If you're watching, for example, if you're watching the Super Bowl, which how the Super Bowl is, there's commercials every 3 minutes.
Right.
So baseball is kind of the same way. Like, if you're watching, you want to see the action. You don't watch the game to see 45 seconds in between pitches. You want to see the game speed up a little bit. You want to get the game moving along. You want to see what's going to happen. You don't want to just wait and wait and wait. Obviously, the Super Bowl has funny commercials, so those are okay to watch. But like, if you're just watching any televised football game or baseball game, and you don't go to watch the commercials, let's be honest. Right. You're there to watch the game. And the more time you have from the owner's perspective or the broadcaster's perspective, the more time there is to throw commercial breaks in there. So, the whole thing going back even a little further to limiting the mound visits. I don't know what it is. If it's 5 a game or 7 a game.
It's 7. Yeah.
Like, that speeds the game up too, because every time a pitcher or a pitching coach or manager walks out to the mound, you go to commercials. So
that being said,
as a viewer, as a spectator, you would think that the fans would appreciate it because you're getting to the action faster. You're not just wasting time and waiting longer to see what's going to happen.
That being said, I think it's interesting that they put it at 7, because I know, like, any less and you're really messing with kind of the strategy that needs to go into the game. But I can't think of a game that I've watched where there's been 7 mound visits.
That's a lot.
Unless like the starter's getting roughed up in the first. I can't think of a situation where you even really come close to 7.
Yeah, but you got to have something, because having unlimited, really, it does delay the game. But 7, the 7's very friendly towards the pitchers and the pitching coaches and the managers. I think that's what you wanted.
It's interesting hearing your take as a player on these rules, because it makes a lot more sense. I think the problem that's being skewed to the public is the way that it's being explained to anyone that's not directly a part of the game, because not just in baseball, but in basketball and in places where these other rules are coming into play to quicken the game or to lessen the time that a player's out there. At one point, you can even go back in the history of this podcast and hear me, I am a baseball purist, and I think there's something to be said for the people that fall in love with sports or fall in love with anything. You fall in love with it for reasons other than the game takes 3 hours, for reasons other than, oh man, there's so much time in between pitches. I mean, it's great to see it speed up, but there is a risk, I believe, in if you do too much, that it takes away the heart of the game, or it takes away the essence of the thing that the most loyal fans fell in love in the first place, because a lot of these things are in service of trying to gain new fans that may or may not stick around.
Right.
And so for me, the biggest concern is I mean, the instant replay, some people had a problem with it when it came in 2012, but we barely talk about it. You might be right, and some of these things we might not talk about a couple of years from now. But I worry that if we keep going in the direction that some of these rules are coming from, not just in baseball, but in other sports, you're gonna do more damage, because you're gonna start losing some of the more loyal fans that fell in love with it for reasons other than, time of game, and in service of some casual fans that are like, oh, it takes 15 minutes less now. Let's watch it,
Yeah. Honestly, instant replay probably the best addition to baseball, and I
I
wish
would
they
agree
had
with
that in the
that. Yeah.
minor leagues. And this goes back to the automated strike zone and everything too. Human error doesn't have to be a part of the game. You could still have umpires, but human error from the standpoint of the umpires minimally affects their career as to where it could majorly affect the player's career that they are doing wrong.
How would
Now,
how, how would you see an umpire fitting in if they're still out there? How would you see them fitting in a situation where you have an automatic strike zone? Because
they'd have a mic. They'd have a mic in their ear.
I was gonna say
You know,
because I don't know if there's a lot of people that are familiar with what that would look like.
yeah, they'd have a mic. They did that. They did some test. I think an indie ball. I think they did the test of the automatic strike zone.
So so what you're saying is they would still be on the field making the ball and strike calls, but they would not be the ones using the discretion.
they would it would eliminate the human error aspect of baseball. They would still have a purpose. There's still rules that need to be enforced.
Right.
However, their job would become a lot simpler. But I'm okay with that. To be honest, like umpires should not have the power to manipulate a game, the state of a game. One, there's several instances where umpires have made bad calls and cost teams games.
Armando
And
Galarraga.
not yeah, and it doesn't have to be that way because
Yeah.
that's not the way it should be. If a team, say, like for example, like going back to the game that I had, and I'm not talking about just me here, but
Right.
like say it's a division game, you're in game 7, 3-2 count, bottom of the ninth inning, bases loaded, tie ball game, and
The
umpire
misses.
rings you up on a ball that's off the plate. The game's over if they have the proper call. Now, who's to say that the other team doesn't win that game and move on to the next round because of one bad call from the umpire? So, there's just a lot of, I'm sure there'll be a lot of controversy surrounding the topic, but personally, I think it's good to have consistency because inconsistency is what gets in baseball players' heads. Like, oh, I don't like as a hitter, you're going through the game and you're hitting, and then you get rung up on a ball that you don't think is a strike, and then you're replaying it in your head. And I know it's everybody wants you to flush that at bat, the previous at bat, and go on to the next one, but then you're second guessing yourself, like, oh, was it a strike? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think it was, but it could have been. So then you're second guessing yourself, and then you go look at it the next day and it wasn't a strike and you were right. But how many at bats after that did you have that you're still second guessing yourself? You got to be a little bit more protective of the plate because the zone's a little bigger.
Right. And I was gonna say in the situation you mentioned where you get called out on a ball that's 2 or 3 inches outside the zone, you go back to the dugout and and you say to yourself, okay, I didn't like that, but that's obviously what this guy's strike zone is gonna be. So then the next time you're up there, you see that pitch again that is not a strike, but he called it last time. So you swing and miss, or you swing and you make bad contact at a pitch you would not otherwise have swung at, but it's probably going to be called a strike, right?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's a big part of it. I don't think human error has to be there. And going back to like the pitch clock and all that, you were discussing that a couple of minutes ago. Media and news outlets, they only cover the controversial stuff because that's what gets them views and that's what, gets the people involved. They don't, there's that one instance where the Braves player got rung up in the ninth and the game ended. But there's also, I'm sure since spring training started, 1,000 other instances where the pitch clock didn't affect the game, So, the rule is there. You just have to follow it.
I think, like I mentioned, that human error doesn't have to be part of the game. The umpire's job is to almost not be noticed. And so I think as long as we can go through and not notice that the pitch clock is there, and I think the more time we spend with it, we won't. And so I think it could end up being something like instant replay, like, oh man, this is great, kind of thing. The one I still have a problem with, and I still, and I'll let you go here in a second. The one that I still have a problem with, to me, is the ghost runner on second. And I get the purpose of it, right? I get that it's to get out of there in 10 or 11 innings as opposed to 14, 15, 16, because sitting through 14, 15, 16 can be brutal sometimes. But I try to gauge the usefulness of it with, there's a bit of nonsensicalness to it as well, from the standpoint of, if you're up there as a pitcher and you're like, I could lose this game because there's a guy standing there and I've pitched my best game up to this point, and if he scores, we lose, and I had nothing to do with him. It's not really like all these other things from, bigger bases might be safer, from pitch clock speeding it up. The ghost runner seems to me a thing a minute ago, something that could be going too far, because it's not something that actively happens in the game, from the sense of, if you put a pitch clock on there, the pitches are being thrown quicker, the at bats are getting over quicker. But to just put somebody out there that did not,
I get where you're coming
that
from,
did not, get a hit, that did not draw a walk, that had no interaction with the pitcher, and have the outcome of the game be on that guy, where the pitcher could come in and get 2 fly balls that are outs and lose the game. And to me, that doesn't seem right.
No, I understand your standpoint on that, and I would understand the standpoint for a lot of people on that, because that does have an impact on the game. Now, I'm not the biggest supporter of that. I am, but I'm not. So it does help speed up the game, which as a player absolutely plays into the longevity of the season. So, if you go out and you play a 16 inning game and it takes 5 hours, and you play till 1 o'clock in the morning, and you have another game and at 10 a.m. the next day, that is rough. That's hard. You're going home, you're getting 5 to 6 hours of sleep. You're coming back to the field nice, bright and early, probably going to have a show and go ordeal. So you're not necessarily the most prepared for the next day. So it does play into the athlete's side of things a little bit, speeding up the game. However, I understand where you're coming from as the spectator. It's unnatural to have that runner there in the extra innings. And the thing about it, though, too, is, it's an equal opportunity. So both teams have to deal with it. However, the home team probably has advantage of knowing what to do next. So say the visiting team goes out and they give up that run, the home team knows they have to score. If they go out and hold them, the home team still has to score, but they could possibly leave a different pitcher out there. So it does play into the home team's advantage a little bit there. It is unnatural. However, I think the thought of the athlete at that standpoint is the biggest ordeal. So, the longevity of the game, how long it goes, and, keeping it from going 16 innings is, in my opinion, a pretty big deal. I've played some long baseball games before we had that rule implication, and I have not played a 16-inning game since the rule.
Like, I think you used a good word there, and it's you said it's not natural. And I think that, because a lot of these things, even talking with you through the pitch clock has changed my stance on it, and some things and the more we understand about it, the more that it makes sense. Instant replay, that made sense once we got through it. The pitch clock makes sense because the things that enhances, the things that those rules enhance, are natural occurrences of the sport. And whereas a ghost runner is not. So with the fact that you see 14 to 11 games go 224, you see a pitcher in spring training strike out a guy in 20 seconds. If these rules significantly speed up the game, which it sounds like they're going to, do you think they'd consider removing the ghost runner? Because that's still the more controversial of the rules that has come up. I know I am either fine or am coming around on everything else. But it's that ghost runner that it's unnecessary to me now. Now that these other rules are in place, obviously from the player standpoint, not having to play 16 innings because you're getting out of there, in 10 or 11, that's fine. But with these other rules, even a 16-inning game wouldn't take nearly as long if there's a pitch clock. So do you see down the line possibly the removal of the ghost runner because of the fact that it's not maybe as natural or well received as some of these other rules from the outside.
Possibly, it's hard to say what they're going to do next. So these are rules that have to be agreed upon by the players as well. So it's not just like the MLB's throwing. In the minor leagues, they could do whatever they wanted. Now we're unionized in the minor leagues, so they can't. They have to run that by the basically the MLBPA.
Right.
And but at the major league level, these rules all have to be agreed upon by the players. So, if there's implications that, the ghost runner at second, that has to be agreed upon by both parties. So my standpoint on it, I don't know that they'll remove it just because, 30 minutes off of the game, a 9-inning game would take about 45 to 50 minutes off of a 16-inning game. You're still playing for 4.5 hours probably, and you're still going to be out there. I see it more as an athlete, from the athlete perspective, protecting our bodies. So, baseball seasons are ruthless. They are every single day grind. And, if you have an off day, if you're fortunate to have an off day, then it's usually a travel day. And your body's not ever getting an opportunity to recover. And if you push that to a limit that it's not used to, that's where you increase the possibility of injury. So
Right.
if you're playing a 16-inning game one night and then you happen to go out and play a 14-inning the next night, and then you still have a day game the next day, and I've had that happen. We had I'm trying to think what level, it might have been low A. We played a super long game one night, played another long game the next night, and then we had a day game the following day. And I'll tell you, I felt like my body got hit by a truck. It was because I played all three of them, and it was borderline to the point where, like, I got to hit the brakes a little bit. I can't play 100% because I'm going to blow something out here. And, so I see it from the athlete perspective of keeping the game at a reasonable length. And
Right.
I know a lot of people, especially spectators, aren't going to see it from that because, the big problem with the separation between spectators and athletes is spectators look at athletes as, almost like indestructible, invincible human beings, when in the reality of it is we get beat up, and
For sure,
we need our breaks and breathers and some sustainability in the length of the games. And without that, we're just going to be pushed to the point of exhaustion and on the brink of injury for the following games. So that's my outlook on it. And I understand why there would be two different perspectives on it, but I just protect the athlete at all costs.
Obviously, I am more of a spectator than an athlete. But I've never seen it personally, and I think there are several spectators that would say that I think it's more of a, not so much athletes are invincible, and the athletes make all this money, they should go out there, and more of a, these changes aren't being presented to us in a way that makes it sound like more than, these entitled players just don't want to play. Because that leads me to want to ask you, obviously they're two different sports, the load on your body are two different things. Where do you stand on load management in basketball? Because obviously they play less games, they play less in a week, and you have these star players just sitting out.
So basketball compared to baseball, obviously you're jumping a lot. It's a lot more impact on your knees and your joints, as to where baseball you're kind of level. You're on the level ground. You're more sprinting, fast paced, draw a line, run that line. Basketball is very lateral and much harder on the joints. So, it's kind of like comparing apples to oranges in that perspective.
For sure.
You're as a basketball player, your body's taking a beating every time you go up. You're at risk for tearing something in your knee or spraining an ankle or pulling a muscle. Baseball, well, you're probably less inclined to tear a muscle in basketball, but more inclined to tear a ligament or a joint. And baseball, you're probably more inclined to pull a muscle, which would be obviously much less crucial to your career and less likely to tear a ligament.
I would say, going back to being how it's being presented, that the MLB is doing a much better job, and baseball is doing a much better job presenting stuff to fans than the NBA is. I think the NBA has done a terrible job, because it ends up being like they've limited the number of back-to-backs. And so like you have some teams that are only playing twice a week, and then you have players on top of that only playing twice a week sitting out.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
from the fan perspective of, and I feel like a lot of players understand this now. It's more than it was. So I think load management, as big of a problem as it is in the NBA, is going to start to go away, because a lot of players are starting to realize, like, because I think where there might be a disconnect between viewers and players, as far as, viewers not understanding that players' bodies get beat up. I think sometimes at the highest level, at the NBA, in the NFL, that the player can lose sight of the fact that the resources to the viewer are much less, and so they can only watch their favorite players play 2-3 times a year. And if your player's sitting out fully healthy, that's the problem in the NBA. I think the MLB has done a much better job of, like, if you're healthy, go out there and play. If you're not, explain that you're not, instead of just saying, "Oh, I'm going to rest today." Because I think there's a chasm right now between the fan and the player in the NBA, because of they've already taken these rules to space it out, and then players are still just sitting.
From my perspective, if something is bugging me, if you're 100% healthy and you're sitting out and you're refreshed, that's one thing that, is I do understand that there are spectators that go there just to see that specific athlete. But if there's, some complication or possible foreseeing an injury, then I understand. But that's probably a managerial decision alongside the athlete. And, I forget the athlete who it was, but might have been Derek Jeter. It was a baseball player. But the way he said it, I have people coming out to see me. So he had this extremely long run of games played, and he said his reasoning behind it was, people come out just to see me. If I don't play and there's people out there to see me, I'm disappointing the fan base.
One more question. You're currently rehabbing an injury. How is that rehab going, and what's next for you?
I'm still just grinding it out. Like I said, I think in the beginning, I'm 5 months into the rehab process. So I had surgery back in October. It's an 8 to 9 month recovery. So it's feeling good right now, strong, starting to get back into the running activity. I've got a little bit more time, obviously, just continue down the path that I'm going with rehab, physical therapy, and keep going. And, ultimately the goal is to get back to baseball comfortably and play. But, if that doesn't work out, I have backup plans. So it's no stress either way. But ultimately, the baseball's been my life essentially for 25 years. And, to give that up is hard, but I got to do what's best for me. And, I'm doing everything I can to get back to it. So hopefully it all goes well and I can get back out there and make a name, get back to get up to the big leagues.
Exactly. Well, Donnie, we thank you for joining the podcast today. We wish you all the best in your recovery, and hopefully we can see you back on the baseball field soon. I appreciate this, man. Thanks.
Yeah, good talking with you, Roman. Take care.
And that was our interview with Donnie Dewees. I want to thank Donnie again so much for joining us, wishing him all the best on his injury recovery and getting back on the field. That's all the time I have for you. Stay tuned next week for a very exciting interview with University of North Florida basketball coach Matthew Driscoll. You may remember him from the 2015 NCAA tournament when he was quoted as saying, "Ballers make plays and dudes are dudes." That's who we're interviewing on the next episode, and trust me, you will not want to miss it. I am Roman Gennaro. This is Empire Sports Talk. See you next time.